and welcome to another Jew and Gentile podcast. I am your host, Chris Katulka, and with me is none other than the Jew himself, the one, the only, Mr. Steve Herzig, the Jewish sage. What am I saying? Good to see you, Steve.
Hey, it's good to be seen.
I really messed up that introduction.
I love it. We're real.
Aren't
we real?
Let me go back and rephrase a few things. It's the Friends of Israel Jew and Gentile podcast.
Of course.
And this is the Jewish sage, Steve Herzig, and I'm the dunce that messed it all up.
Hardly. Hey, listen, we're transparent. Isn't that's in the news? The Trump administration has just let out the JFK files where they're saying they are they use the word ultra transparent.
Ultra transparent.
So do we want to adopt that?
You just see right through them. They're translucent. You're so transparent.
Well, are we at the Friends of Israel Jew and Gentile podcast going to be transparent?
I think actually, of all the podcasts that I know of, I think we're the most transparent. I'll tell you the reason why. Because the moment that there's a tech hiccup, you know what Steve does? He announces to everybody, I think this thing is broken. Okay. No, keep going. I think it's broken. So,
we should do a podcast of how we get ready for a podcast.
It'd take 5 seconds.
That's right. It wouldn't take people long. Our 7 people want to know, how do they do this? How do they do this?
All right, do you really want to know? Text us, 424-444-1948. Hey, really quick, Steve, I want to make sure we spend a lot of time giving people great information, but we also have great ways for people to connect with us. And boy, you've been handing out stickers, and we've got pins and stickers.
That's right. Chris, I went and looked. We had 34 pins last time. We got 2 people who wanted them.
Oh, no, we got more now.
Oh, okay. Of course. True to form, you don't tell me anything. You told me last week 2 people. But I, in faith, went and looked in my house to see if I had more. And I do. And by the way, I also have Canadian ones as well. So if you're in Canada, I don't know if one of our listeners is in Canada, but if they are, we can send you a Canadian pin as well. But Chris, I brought some more. I got a whole bunch on our table right here.
Good.
And so if people will text you at 424-444-1948, we'll send you a sticker. Number 1, stickers. That's right.
50 of them. Forget about one.
That's
50.
right. Oh, Alice worked yesterday. She said, I hope you know I'm volunteering. I said, of course I know you're volunteering. The budget can't take it. It's costing us too much money to send the stickers out. We can't pay somebody who's putting the stickers together.
Oh, my
We're
goodness.
happy to send them out. So they get 50 stickers if they text at
424-444-1948.
And if they have a special request of a pin that is the United States flag and the Israeli flag, we will also send that to them. If they're willing to wear a pin, we're willing to give them that pin. And just so you know, Chris, through the years, not in my department, and I certainly understand why, Friends of Israel itself, I don't know if it was in our catalog or not, but when we go to conferences, we usually have an opportunity for people to purchase them very inexpensively, but they purchase them. But here, because we're nuts, and because we only have 7 listeners, if they do contact us at 424-444-1948, we'll send it to them free.
Well, Steve, I want you to know, last week you gave everybody the lowdown on how we do this. And I'm going to tell you, people were cracking up. Okay? They love knowing how we get the stickers out. And we're updating. We're becoming
2025, and we're doing it like it's 1990.
Well, just to let you know, Pastor Neil left us a message. I want to play it after he found out how we do it. Here it is.
Okay, guys. Here I am on my trail run on a Thursday this time. Normally it's on a Friday. I listen to the podcast.
He's transparent.
And I'm just so amazed at the explanation of the stickers. I just wanted to give kudos to the Jew. And really, I just wanted to say, make sure you have that in the show notes. And I'm wondering if you have a copyright on that explanation of stickers. I might want to use it as a sermon illustration or something.
Pastor Neil. I love it. Thank you, Pastor Neil. That was absolutely fantastic. If you want to know how we do it, go back and listen to the last podcast. And
Don't bother.
There's a great there's a great Yiddish word. It's fartik and fartik. Okay,
That's right.
But Steve,
well, tell them what it means, because some people are just heard that word and they have no idea what it means.
They might have thought that maybe we had some beans or something earlier. Okay, it means like let it be.
That's right.
Let it be. Fartik. Let it be. Okay, so Steve, yes, if you want to get your stickers, if you want to stay connected with us, and we have pins now, let us know. Text us 424-444-1948. Okay, Steve, we got this. I was watching Mark Levin the other night, and Mark Levin had a guest on who wrote a book. And the book,
Josh Hammer.
That's right. Josh Hammer was on. I think he's actually a Newsweek editorial writer too.
He is for Newsweek.
For Newsweek, which surprised me.
And he is a self-described conservative writing for Newsweek. That ought to encourage people who go,
yeah.
They go, oh, Newsweek, everything's bad. You never know. Sources can be very interesting where they work, the information they have. You got to judge each thing.
100%. And so he wrote a book called Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Western civilization is rooted in Judeo-Christian tradition, and its enemies know well that to deny the existence of God and destroy individual rights, private property, and freedom, they must first destroy the Jews. Steve, very fascinating.
Actually, I'm looking at an article written by Janet Levy, who, that's her title, How the Fate of the West is Tied to the Fate of the Jewish Nation. And she is talking about this book by Josh Hammer. And she says, she quotes him in the article, and it says this: for Christians, adherents of the West's dominant religion, it is imperative to internalize the basic truth of civilization. They're instrumental in building and developing is largely predicated upon values and principles derived from the Hebrew Bible. It is not just the Hebrew Bible. The Talmud as well has been central to the formation of Western civilization as a unique strand of human experience. Rather, it is also the Jews themselves, the original people of the book, who introduced monotheism to the world, who have always been foundational to the entire construct. Chris, we invented civilization. Look, Western civilization. It's Jewish. And you always say to me, Jewish people invented this. You always say that. I have it from a Jewish person. Josh, is he Jewish?
Yeah, I believe so.
I think he is.
Make this a chapter in your We Invented It book.
We invented Western civilization.
You know, it is getting, if you ever sit down and read the Mishnah or the Talmud, it's a compilation of arguments where rabbis are arguing with each other over a particular issue of the law. All you got to do is turn on C-SPAN and watch how Congress, with professionalism for the most part, they go back and forth and back and forth. There's a speaker who takes in the information, and the person gets to speak, and this person gets to argue their points. And
the good lady from this state, or the gentleman, they're very, very respectful before they lay into you.
And what are they doing? They're debating over the law, what could be law, what should be law, how things should be done. It's no different than the Talmud. You go to parliamentary systems that are different than even how we do politics in the United States and Canada, the UK, all over Europe. Those parliamentary systems, they do the exact same thing. The structures are a little bit different, but the point is exactly right, Steve. The basis of democracy, Western civilization, is grounded in what the scriptures teach, and what comes from the Old Testament and the New Testament. Even the idea of America itself could be routed back to the Reformation period, when Martin Luther was teaching about individual priesthood. You don't need somebody to connect you to Jesus. You have the ability as a believer in Jesus to talk to Jesus. It's a one-to-one relationship. And so what's going on is that Martin Luther's changing the way that you think about how you relate with Jesus, how you relate with God. You don't need a priest to do confession or a pope or whatever. And all of a sudden, this concept begins to work its way into philosophical teachings about politic. And what happens now, human rights are important, and individual freedoms are important, and personal property is important, and all of these things. Where does that all ground itself in? It grounds itself in what the scriptures were teaching from thousands of years ago.
Chris, all I have to do is go to the prophet Isaiah.
Yes.
Go to the prophet Isaiah. They called America the great experiment. Well, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But we invented America. Listen to this verse and tell me I'm wrong.
I know exactly what you're right.
Here we are in Isaiah chapter 33 and verse 22. For the Lord is our judge.
1.
The Lord is our lawmaker.
2.
The Lord is our king.
3.
Kind of 2.5, because America didn't want a king. They talked about having a king. George didn't want to have a king. But 3 distinct, God
branches.
is one, but there's 3 branches, and where do they come from? A Jewish guy.
Isaiah 33. The judiciary, the judge, the Congress,
The lawmaker.
the law, and then the king,
executive branch.
That's exactly right.
So, Chris, you can make fun of me. We invented
I'm not making fun of you.
Western civilization. And in the course of Western civilization comes the United States, the great experiment, which they lifted right from the prophet Isaiah.
Well, it says this. Janet Levy goes on and says, unfortunately, the seminal role that Jews have played in the formation of Western civilization is being downplayed or criticized to
Pernicious.
pernicious effect. Thank you for saving me there.
No problem.
Morality for
You left me hanging before, but I'm coming to the rescue.
Thank you so much. And shame on me. That should be in the 7 Noahide laws.
Always save the Gentile.
That's right.
And let the Jewish guy hang.
That's going to be the downfall of Western civilization right there.
That's right.
All right. Well, it says this, that that morality for the Jew is absolute, permanent, and unyielding. The Jew is a testament to the existence of God and his expectations from humans. That is, to reflect the divine image in all that humans do on earth. Therefore, for the godless postmodern ideologies of moral relativism, writes Hammer, the Jew is a prized target, for he is the embodiment of an enduring testimony of God's existence, his kingdom, and his divine will.
I am telling you, Janet Levy, write it. Some people say preach it. For her, I'm saying write it.
That's right. But they're saying, Steve, that to target Jewish people is to target Western civilization. That's really what it comes down to. And you could see Hitler in an attempt to undo. Think about who he was fighting with. He was fighting with all of the countries of Western civilization. And then at the exact same time, he was looking to eradicate the Jewish people, which is exactly, this isn't a new...
burn their books.
That's right.
He wanted to burn their books. And Chris, whatever you want to say about the Talmud, the Mishnah, look, when I was in synagogue, I heard about Talmud. For many Orthodox Jews, the idea of the Bible, the Torah, and the Talmud, there's very little, sometimes none at all, differentiation. They blend them together, where we would, as evangelicals, as believers, we believe that the Torah is the Word of God, but anything outside of what we call the Old Testament and the New Testament would not be Scripture. From a Jewish point of view, what the old rabbis say is paramount to Scripture itself.
Do we're talking about Jewish people, and even I'm thinking of all the anti-Semitism going on college campuses right now. It doesn't just have to be outside forces that are trying to eradicate Jewish people, which is undoing Western civilization. It's happening from within. College campuses, as we see, are it's the brain trust of where we're sending all of our kids to get this education. We're sending them there. It's almost like a funnel. Like you graduate from high school, go to this little funnel here, and then you're going to spit back out and become a good citizen of the United States of America, productive and all that stuff. But what happens is they go in there and they get brainwashed to believe that the problem with the world is Israel. The problem with the world are the Jewish people. Look at this. Anti-Semitism goes up. There's a lot of anti-Israel sentiments. And so not only is it an outside force, Steve, that's eroding Western civilization, it's an inside an issue that's within our country as well, that's slowly eroding these the foundation of how we live our lives on a daily basis. You know, really, these conversations that we're having, they're not in the weeds. What Hammer is showing us, Josh Hammer, he's pulling us to like a 40,000 view foot of what's going on in the world and giving us a big picture. Look, Western civilization is tied to the scriptures and it's crumbling beneath us. And what's the first to go? What's the first target? The Jewish people.
Well, Chris, just so our listeners know, we haven't read, at least I haven't read his book. I went online when I first heard about this, and you can download it on Kindle next week, so you could buy an early edition. Let me just read what Janet Levy says at the end of the article. Hammer's book was life-changing. That's a pretty big endorsement from a writer who's writing for a magazine like the American Thinker and saying, my life, I'm a scholar, but my life's been changed as I've read this. It reoriented my perspective on Judaism, Jewishness, and made me better understand the underpinnings of anti-Semitism and how dangerous it is for the West. So why don't you once again read? We're not getting paid anything. I don't know Josh Hammer, but that's a big endorsement, and it was enough for me to go purchase it. How would our 7 listeners get the book? What's the title?
Well, I can go on there. Oh, the title is Israel and Civilization, the Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West.
You'll put it in the...
I'll put it in the show notes.
The show notes.
Just scroll down.
You got to scroll down.
Hey, but I was going to say too, Steve, about this is that, Jewish people live all around the world. So we're talking about, number one, about anti-Semitism that's happening within our own country and Europe and South America, all of these places. But the reality, though, too, is that Israel sits on the fence between two major civilizations, the East and West. And they kind of, if we've talked about this before, in Israel's history over the thousands of years, they've always been stuck between civilizations as they've maintained their allegiance to the law and to hopefully follow God, not
Their
perfectly.
Their unique identity has been retained.
That's right. But the reality is, we just talked about Haman. We talked about Esther. What was that all about? It was about the fact that they were obeying the law, that we would sit here and go, hey, look, it's the bedrock of Western civilization. Well, this was, 2,500 years ago, and there's a man named Haman that didn't like that this tiny group of people would refuse to bow down to him. And so, what I'm trying to say is that Israel sits on that fence right now, and they're in a unique place because they are the bridge that connects the East and the West. And so really they become the centerpiece, as Ezekiel 5:5 says, right in the middle of the world.
God knew it all the time. That's why I put it there.
That's right. So go ahead and get that book by Josh Hammer. We'll put it in the show notes, Israel and Civilization, the Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. All right, Steve, we're going to talk about a very famous passage in the law. Maybe you might not know all of the law of the Old Testament, but there are some things that stick out to you. And I'm not even talking about the 10 commandments. I'm talking about getting down into the 603 commandments, not the 10.
Not 603.
No, but I'm saying it's plus 10. People know the 10 commandments.
You did the math.
That's
okay,
right. I
that's
subtracted,
fine.
so 613 laws.
You're right.
We're talking about the other.
You faked me out.
Sorry about that. Sorry. And I'm not leaving you hanging. I promise you, okay? But when you think about the other 603 laws on top of the 10 commandments, there's some that stick out. Now, Steve, this comes with a story first. And the story is this. For many years, I led the origins trips to Israel. And you've done Hesed before
and
as well.
Hesed is, as we tape, Hesed is in Israel.
They're in Israel right now, serving the Israeli people at Kaplan Medical Center.
Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. We hardly even think about it, even here at the home office. We pray for them, but it's a huge deal.
There's a group of Christians over serving the Israeli people
That's
right
right. So when people are hearing, when our 7 listeners turn on the radio and they say, oh, look, Israel just bombed Hamas. That's right. We have people who are working at a hospital that is rocket distance from Gaza.
It's about 40 minutes from Gaza border, 50 minutes from Gaza border. But when you're there, sometimes we work in the kitchen. And when you work in the kitchen,
right, what a job.
Yeah, you gotta, it's cleaning dishes and cleaning the forks and the knives. And we're talking, it's a big cafeteria. It's a cafeteria
for the whole hospital.
And the hospital it basically helps the center of Israel. It's a big, big hospital.
Those people are hungry.
Those actually think it is the largest campus for a hospital in Israel, okay? So when you're there, our job sometimes is to clean the dishes. And when you're done cleaning the dishes, you put the dishes away. Well, each dish is marked, Steve. One is blue. It's got a little blue emblem of Kaplan, and one has an orange emblem of Kaplan. Well,
The dairy and the meat.
the milkik and the fleshik.
Fleshik, that's right.
So one day I was there. I didn't know anything, and I walk up.
Oh, no. Don't tell me.
Oh, boy. I'm telling you right now. I bring the dishes, and I'm waving at people. Hey, how's it going? And everyone's like, hey, and we're talking, and I put the dish. I just set them down on top of the other dishes. It was an explosion of emotion. The guy runs over to me. What are you doing? I can't believe. He went from my friend to my enemy overnight in a second. He goes, what are you doing? I can't believe you're doing this. I'm just doing my job.
We have to rewash all the dishes.
100%. I put the meat dish on top of the milk dish, which means there's the breakfast dish, the blue one, and then the orange dish is the lunch dish. That has the meat, orange, blue has no meat, nothing. And so you have to keep these things separate. You have to keep the
They're
meat
stored
from the milk.
separately. They're washed separately. They are same with the silverware. Same thing. And the one question you get, wait a minute, don't you wash the dishes? Isn't that enough? No.
No, you got to keep them separate. And on top of that, an Orthodox Jewish
rabbi,
even family, will have two sinks. A sink for the milk dishes and a sink for and dishwashers, I think, separate. Two dishwashers sometimes.
Yep.
Keeping the milk dishes and the meat dishes separate. And if you ever want to see what that looks like, you got to come with us on Encounter. A Orthodox Jewish family will show you their home. So I'm not lying to you. The mother says, here's this sink does the meat dishes. This sink does the milk dishes. And it go through everything.
But in the hospital, Chris, and in restaurants and hotels, they have a heart attack when they see somebody like you make a mistake like that because they get a seal of approval from the rabbi. And if you don't have that seal of approval, you are in economic distress.
100%. What I did was equivalent of finding a rat infestation in your restaurant. It's a big deal because Steve is right. If you're not a kosher certified, you're not getting any business. That's just the way it is. Even though Jewish people, when they leave, they might go when they come to America, bacon, eggs, they'll eat it all. They'll mix the milk and the meat. But when they go, they know when they go home, the kosher stamp matters.
It does.
But Steve, the reason why we bring that up is because you found an article that was really well done, and I had just gone through it on the very popular phrase, a law. Do not boil a young goat in its mother's milk, which comes from Exodus 23:19, Exodus 34:26, and Deuteronomy 14:21. So it's repeated
3 times.
God's saying something here.
3. Look, are you into numerology? The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And here we have, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk 3 times.
We get it already.
All right, you better understand. So, Chris, when I was raised in a kosher home, my grandmother had it. We lived with my grandmother for a time. I did the same thing, only I wasn't in a Jewish home. You were raised Gentile. You were trying to help in a hospital. I was just 6 years old putting stuff away, and I put a fork from the milkits in the fleshik. And my grandmother went ballistic.
Did she?
Ballistic. And you have to learn the lesson. This side, at her kitchen, this side was the meat, and this side was the dairy. And it comes from this verse. The interpretation, what does it mean? So, the rabbis have given us the best known interpretation. And I can tell you their interpretation has so influenced me that to this day, the idea of a milkshake and a hamburger nauseates me.
Oh, yeah.
I can't do it. I can't do it. I mean, I'm not under kosher laws anymore, but it's from this verse. Explain to people why
you wouldn't come to Shake Shack and get yourself a delicious burger.
I could get the burger. I wouldn't get the shake.
Well, in Israel, if you went, I've had this before. I don't know if it's like this at all McDonald's, but you show up, you can buy a hamburger and a milkshake, but there's 2 separate stores. You have to make the conscious choice to buy things twice. So you go get your hamburger and you pay for it. You're done. Transaction over. But then you walk next door. There's a wall that divided the McDonald's, and then you could buy a milkshake. But that transaction,
that's on you.
it's
on you.
Separate
That's
transaction.
Right. It's on you. You're
That's right.
guilty, and the store is not guilty.
God's gonna say, "Show me those receipts."
That's right. Show me the receipts. So the interpretation is the idea of mixing milk with meat, or dairy and meat.
Don't
together.
cook a young goat in its mother's milk.
That is overwhelmingly the number one interpretation. It's discussed by you could just Google that verse and get Jewish people, and by the way, Christians as well. It's amazing. If you're going to exegete the passage, if our 7 listeners want to just Google it, there's Christians chiming in as to what this means and why did God put it there. That's the number one interpretation, and certainly the number one Jewish interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
But Chris, the reason you and I are bringing this up is because there could be other reasons. It's just off the top of your head, you say that and you move on. But there are a couple other, at least there's probably more, but a couple other possibilities.
You know, it's interesting because they're often, whenever this is mentioned, especially it's mentioned twice in Exodus. And every time it's mentioned in Exodus, it's connected to the feast of like a festival offering. So bring the best of your first fruits, verse 19 of Exodus 23. Bring the best of your first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. You know, that comes out of nowhere. And then Exodus 34, verse 26, which says, bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So it's repeating what was said before. And then you could also look at Deuteronomy 14, and I'll read that really quick as I flip here. Deuteronomy chapter 14.
Verse 21.
Yep, verse 21. You didn't leave me hanging. Thank you very much. Says, do not do anything you find already. Do not eat anything you already find dead. If you give it to the foreigner residing in any of your towns, and they may eat it, or you may sell it to another foreigner. But you are a people holy to the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So the context is a little different, but still, it's a phrase that comes across 3 times. So you have to imagine, if it's mentioned 3 times in the law, it must stand out more to the seriousness of why my hand got slapped when I was at Kaplan Medical Center, and your hand got slapped by your grandmother, and so forth and so on.
But you know, Chris, it's interesting. I have a story to tell. A friend of mine who drove a Mercedes, and he hit a deer. A deer, by the way, is kosher. This person wasn't Jewish, but he was driving his Mercedes, and a deer ran in front of his Mercedes, and he killed it. So what do? If you're Jewish, you put it to the side, even if you like venison. You killed it. You can't do anything if it's killed by something else other than the proper slaughtering.
That's right.
What did he do with it? He gutted it, put it in the back of his Mercedes so that he could eat it. If you're under the law,
roadkill.
Roadkill is anti-Jewish.
100%.
It's automatic. And so the idea, I said, you what? He said, well, I killed it, already did damage to my car. I field dressed it and took it home and hung it.
Now, let me ask you this. Did he stop by and get a milkshake on the way home?
That I don't know.
All right,
but Chris, what is the underlying idea, since the location, now we're doing exegesis here.
Yep.
It's
we're getting deep here.
We're getting deeper than we've ever been.
That's right.
Some of our guests have been
our
deep.
Equipment's starting to smoke the
We've
moment you said
boldly
exegesis.
gone where we have never gone before. What's the context of these 3 places? I think it could give us another idea as to what God was saying through the law.
That's right. And actually, this article that you found that comes from, what is this website, too, which I was seeking scripture. I appreciated what was written. It was taken very seriously. Talked about the fact that the common understanding of this phrase that I've heard before, too, is that it's a ritual. It was a pagan ritual to boil the calf in the mother's milk. I used to work at a veal house. It was my first job. And veal was a big deal. Arthur's Veal House.
Boy, some people are already offended. You know how veal is made.
Oh, big time. And that's why I'm saying it's right away. It's kind of got a thing to it.
It's got a negative connotation.
And I'll tell you, I had it all. I had the veal sambuca. I had this. I veal everything. I ate.
Bring on the criticism. I'm going to eat.
That's right. You don't like Bob Dylan, and you got criticism for that. I'll get criticism for the veal, okay? But all that to say is that it could be a Canaanite ritual that God was telling the people of Israel before they entered into the land. You're not going to do what the pagans do. You are a holy people. That's what Deuteronomy's trying to say. You're a holy people. So it almost seems like he's saying, so don't do this because this is what unholy people do.
And by the way, that's a good very reasonable, and one that's very well known.
That's exactly right. The problem with this, with the author of this, and her name is Christy Jordan, she writes and says, this is something I've always known about. I've heard this before, that it's a Canaanite ritual. However, try as I may, I never found proof of this. I only found sources that either speculated this was the reason, stated as the reason with no proof, or stated it as the reason with some proof cited, but not a manner in which we could actually check up on this. We've had this before too. So it's funny how things can get passed down. You just kind of take it at face value. But I've heard this preached a bunch of times, that a high priest goes into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, and he's got a rope wrapped around his leg, just in case he dies and you can pull him out. Well, our good friend and colleague, Bruce Scott, who wanted to know, where is this source? He never found the source. I was in Jerusalem with him when he said, Chris, I'm on it. I've never seen a source. I got to ask somebody. So we're at the Wailing Wall, and he says to a rabbi, hey, I got a question. The rope tied around the leg. What's up with that? Where's the source? And he goes, I know where it is. Guy couldn't find it. So he gives Bruce's email. He says, email me. I'll find it and give it to you. Well, weeks go by. Bruce could probably tell this story better. But the guy finally writes back and says, I found the verse. You know where it came from? It came from the Zohar, a 15th century Jewish text. Now think about this. A 15th century Jewish text, the Zohar, a mystical book, is talking about the rope. It's not coming from the Talmud or the Mishnah. It's coming from it changes your perspective because, well, it's not really the kind of source I thought. Some people even think it might come from the Bible. It doesn't.
Oh, some people do believe it came from the Bible.
But this is the same concept. This concept. She's going, I hear people talking about this. I've seen some sources out there, but I'm not convinced. And she's going, I need more. I like that about somebody.
Yep.
And so she comes up with another theory. So this is another popular theory. She didn't make this up. That's one popular theory, which is the Canaanite one. Here's another one, Steve. Others make the argument that this is the Father's way of teaching us to respect nature, as boiling a child in the milk of its mother, its very life source, is cruel and inhumane to mother and child, and that the Father is making a statement about that here. A good one.
No, that's a very good one. And there'll be people you were just talking about veal. There are people who will not eat veal because it's the inhumane way they treat the baby cow.
I know, and I down that veal.
Well, but nonetheless, so that's another interpretation, and I get it. By the way, it is in the Bible, so we have to underscore that this verse is in the Bible. But then she presents a third option, which became, as I read this, I said, that's very interesting. And I talked to you and we said, we have to talk about this because this doesn't have to do with salvation. This doesn't have to do with your eternal destiny, but it is part of the scripture. And I think if this theory that you're going to talk about is correct, it helps us understand and even apply this principle to Christian living.
100%.
Which is, before I read this, the idea of don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, I would just say don't be like the pagans. Well, that was about it. But now, what does she say, Chris?
Yeah, she says, what if the sentence was a common idiom? of the what if the sentence was a common idiom of the time that everyone understood the meaning of
At the time.
That's right. But that the past several cultures have taken out of context, not realizing that it was an idiom, but taking it as a literal statement instead. Let's look at this option. So they're saying it's an idiom. And I'll tell you something, Hebrew is full of idioms. English is full of idioms.
She gives a couple, flash in the pan, drive your hog.
That's right.
Yeah, she gives a couple, in the article, she gives a couple examples.
I know in Hebrew they say, can you tell it to me standing on one foot, which comes from the Talmud. You know, it's an idea of, can you say it to me fast? You know, those are all idioms that if somebody said to me, and if I understood Hebrew fluently and someone said, can you tell it to me standing on one foot? I'd say, what are you talking about? This actually happens, she writes, pretty often. Have you ever heard the phrase flash in the pan? These days, it means to have great success that quickly fizzles. However, back in the day that this idiom began, it was referring to a misfire from a flintlock. See how just a few generations can lose the original meaning of something? What if I told you that I was going to ride my hog to Walmart? In our time, we assume I had a motorcycle and I was going to drive it to the store. But if this were written in a text and found 100 years from now, the folks would probably insist it was some ancient practice of riding actual pigs.
It's a great example. And if it is an idiom, then the place that it is placed and the 3 times it is mentioned makes it very significant.
Well, and that's why I brought up where it's mentioned each time, because I'm glad that she mentions it too.
Yep.
Christy here mentions that, you know, it's a very interesting place for each one of these things to come up. You know, for in Exodus, both times are associated with bringing your best first fruits to the Lord. And then all of a sudden it has this phrase there, you know, out of nowhere. It seems very abrupt. Same thing with Deuteronomy. And that's why she writes, we simply have to look at these verses in context. In all 3 places where this sentence is mentioned in the Bible, it seems to be very disjointed, just coming at us abruptly and seemingly out of nowhere. That is because to us, it has no context related to it. However, if we look at this verse from a different light, we see something different. Let's read each of these verses. The best of the first fruits of the ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Exodus 23:19. Exodus 34:26. The best of the first fruits of the ground you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. And then, where is it, Steve? My last page here. I lost the last page. Is that it?
What page are you on?
I don't even know anymore.
Well, look at the bottom.
Let's see. Wait, 8. I think I don't have the last page. All right, how are we going to finish this thing? Do you have it?
8. There's this.
Let's see.
Look, the premise.
Oh, here you go. Okay, I got it.
Good.
I got it.
Continue
so,
then.
Now we shall see that the first 2 times it appears is directly following a mention of the first fruits, the best of the best. The 3rd time we see mention offerings after the statement, but in reference to this year-by-year offering, this is the key. You see, the Israelites were accustomed to being mistreated by their landlords and overseers, and so when it comes to sustaining themselves, things were understandably difficult and made more so by their superiors. As slaves in the land, they would have been forced to making offerings to these false gods, which were their rulers worshipped, which the rulers worshipped. Now, with their own resources scarce, and them likely not even worshiping these gods in actuality, it is it's highly probable to assume that they had the practice of trying to shortchange on some of the offerings in order to keep some for themselves. So if you had to bring the first fruits of your wheat, you could take some of the last year's wheat from the bottom. Oh, Steve,
Yep, and from the bottom of the barrel and mix it with the latest, better wheat, and thereby present a lower quality offering while keeping more of the better quality to feed your family with. So the premise is that this could be a Hebrew idiom. So let's assume that it is. Okay, I'm saying that. The mother's milk is representing a previous generation, and the young goat is the latest, newest, best of a new generation. This figure of speech could mean, according to speculation, not to combine the old with the new or one generation of produce with the next.
Interesting.
It's an interesting thing because if that's true, then I, as a believer, now I'm not centered on cheeseburgers and milkshakes and meat and dishes, which our Jewish friends who do that, that's fine. But now as a believer, I say the law was given by God to give the principle, if this is true, that when we give the best, we always give God the best, and not something from the past, a past year instead of the new year. It should be the first fruits of the new year, not taking old stuff.
Do you think there's any connection to that when Jesus says, "Don't put your new wine in old skins"? That kind of mentality as well.
Could be. Yeah. You're already beginning to think out. That verse would have never caused you to think that way unless we had this as a possibility.
Yeah.
And either way, it helps us as believers to incorporate what we might think from time to time is boring reading coming from Exodus and the law and going through the law and Deuteronomy and Moses' swan song is, how many chapters and what does it do? It says, wow, this is really relevant. Am I giving God the best all the time? The best of the best. Not trying to mix the old with the new. Or am I giving God the best all the time? And I just think it's an interesting thing. And it is mentioned 3 times, and the context in which it's mentioned
Bringing the best.
brings the best of the best. So I just found that interesting. I really
it's
appreciate
amazing.
her.
It's amazing, though, too, and you had mentioned this earlier, how we can, as Christians, do the same thing. Here the Jewish people build an entire regulatory system of kosher keeping. Kosher is real. To be kosher this doesn't eliminate, this idiom doesn't eliminate being kosher from the law. What it does, though, is from that one idiom, they have built an entire construction of how you separate certain foods so that they don't touch one another. That's the whole system has been built. That's the man-made component of how the law can lead you away from God and not toward God.
And what's interesting is there are many, many Jewish people, and I might add Christians as well, who have no problem with the idea of kosher. They won't eat pig, they won't eat shellfish, they won't eat. But when you get into the deeper traditions like this verse, they say that just doesn't make the washing and the separate dishes. They just won't get into that. But they'll tell you. I've met many, including Christians, who say, I'm not under the law, but if God don't eat pork and don't eat shellfish, I'm sure he did that for good, and so I'm going to choose to do that. This part is just different, and I really appreciate deeper dive because, quite frankly, if you asked almost anybody, the 90% of them are going to come up with the classic, it's dedicated to a false god, and we're not going to practice that, and we're going to make sure our people don't practice that.
There's a joke that our tour guide Tito tells that I think is really funny, and it's kind of in the concept of these traditions that get boiled down, or get
boiled down.
Yeah,
I get it.
That get worked out over time, and his comes from it's a Catholic joke, and it's yes, it's a Catholic joke, and so
told by a Jewish guy.
They tell the best Catholic jokes. So he says, Chris, they found, the joke is that they found some more Dead Sea Scrolls, and so and these ancient writings, that go back thousands of years or whatever. So they needed it interpreted, and the Catholic priest goes he says to his people, like, I'm going to go in and interpret this, so everyone stay out here, and when I come back out, I'll tell you what it says, and I'll give you the information. So the Catholic priest goes in, and he's interpreting it, and he's going through, and he comes back out, and he opens the door, and his eyes are wide open, and everyone's saying, what does it say? What does the ancient text say? And he says, it says celebrate, not celibate. Anyway, I don't know if that's...
Are we going to get any... Is any of our 7 listeners going to contact you?
I don't know. 424.
444.
1948. Get your stickers. Get your pins and tell me how bad my jokes are,
Hey,
okay?
Chris, I sent you a picture taken from Harvard University in a restaurant right at Harvard of Joe Zhakevich when Alice and I went there back in 2013. And young Joe was there majoring in Jewish studies of some sort at Harvard. And Alice and I went there because he was an intern with us at the same time you were, and I kept track of our interns, and he was off to Israel and then at Harvard, and I wanted to see him and see how things were going, and he took me on a great trip, and now he's Dr. Joe Zhakevich, and he already has done one of his lessons on the Hebrew names of God, and he was fantastic last week.
That's right. Hey, listen, we are the Jew and Gentile podcast is sponsored by FOI Equip, and it's your opportunity to learn the Bible from a Jewish perspective. We've had, as Steve had mentioned, Dr. Joe Zhakevich on talking about the many names of God, and last week he looked at the name Yahweh and unpacked that name and what it means and how it's tied to God's character and his nature and all of it. It's amazing. Next week, he's going to be diving into the names that maybe you've heard of before, like Jehovah Jireh, the God who sees, Yahweh Roeh. And so there's all these amazing names that come from the Old Testament that describe the character and nature of God. And so you're going to hear Dr. Joe talk about this, and he's an old friend of Friends of Israel. He's a professor at Masters University.
You know, Chris, he in talking about Yah, which he used that, he worked on a translation that actually the English translation always has, when it's called for, Yah in the text. What translation did he work on? He was on the council.
Yeah,
right?
he was a translator for the Legacy Standard Bible. He studied at Masters.
That's big time stuff.
Big time. He studied at Masters. He got his degree at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and then he also has a degree from Harvard University. So, hey, look, if you want a really great course taught by a brilliant man.
A brilliant man.
Brilliant. Come to foiequip.org, and there you can register for free to be a part of all the things that are going on here at in FOI Equip and at Friends of Israel. Hey, Steve, before we get to the news, I just want to... I got this from you the other day, and I thought maybe we could add some commentary. What do you think of that? Huh?
I was so excited.
The big band... hymns, Steve. Big band hymns.
Let's hear a little.
That's right. Shall we gather at the river? I don't even know this song.
Oh, this is fantastic. I can't believe... You see, you never tell me anything.
What are you talking? You texted it to me.
I know, but I didn't know you were going to play it.
Well, I don't know how long we can play it. But this is fantastic. I love this.
It is fantastic. A number of years ago, tell you how long ago, they had a cassette tape.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my wife bought me this album on a cassette tape, and I played that thing everywhere I traveled. She does not like big band.
I know she doesn't.
So I was on the road. Nobody's in the car. I am telling you.
I could see you. I just envisioning me driving up next to you, and I look over, and I see you dancing and all of it,
100%. And so yesterday... I don't know what it was. Maybe the Spirit of God. I don't know. I decided to type into YouTube big band Christian hymns. I just typed it in, and as soon as I saw the cover, that's it. So when I said Alice, and she said, what? I said, look at this picture. And she said, oh.
Yeah, I was going to say.
She was not happy.
I was going to say, it's probably like asking Alice to listen to the Jew and Gentile podcast.
Yeah.
Alice, come look at this. Thank you.
Those brought me back to that cassette. I played it all the time. And now I could play it in my car.
Oh.
Just put it on, and it will play song after song after song.
You know, many years ago, my father-in-law, I showed him that you can get YouTube on the TV. And now, what he does? Like I think I created a monster because he listens to jazz All that, like he'll just put on old jazz videos and sit back and listen to the jazz on his
I'm with
TV.
him.
Yeah.
We're in the same age bracket. I'm with him.
He goes, this YouTube is amazing. He just, boom, puts it on like that.
Put it on, and I'm telling you, put that on a little louder again. Do it, just give it and tell me, I know I'm 50s, and I know that I didn't like, I am not a Bob Dylan guy. This I am.
That beginning is pretty killer, and the fact that it's him is even more amazing. I need to get in there and listen to some of these.
Shall we gather by the river?
Do they have amazing grace in big band?
Yes, they do.
They do.
Yeah, absolutely, they do.
That's amazing.
Anyway,
I want to hear Harry Connick Jr. do it.
I am telling you, I've been to some places where I wish they would play it a little upbeat. I mean, I've often wondered at some places where, I'm thankful that they've even invited me. But when they sing the hymns, if they are singing hymns, it is like a dirge. It's like, who died? Or if they're not singing hymns and they're playing more, worship teams, every place I've gone, I can only speak for myself. When they have a worship team up there, the audience doesn't sing. Unless the worship team decides to play an old hymn. And then they all sing. I'm only saying, has that ever happened to you, Chris?
Nah, we have like a worship band.
Okay.
So, we don't really deal with that. But I'd go to a big band worship concert any day of the week. Any day of the week. Hey, you know what else is upbeat, Steve? Trump. Iran must stop supplying Houthis. Either way, they will be completely annihilated.
Now, we're out bringing Trump. It is politics. But
we're not a political show.
But it relates to bombing of Houthis who are threatening Israel all the time and who are directly directed by Iran.
That's right.
Which is not just an enemy of Israel, is an enemy of the United States, North America. They're enemies. Iran must stop supplying Houthis. Either way, they'll be complete. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, reports are coming in that while Iran has lessened its intensity on military equipment and general support of the Houthis, they are still sending large levels of supplies. Iran must stop the sending of these supplies immediately. That comes from President Trump on his True Social platform. He said, let the Houthis fight it out themselves. Either way, they lose, but this way they will lose quickly. Tremendous damage has been inflicted upon the Houthi barbarians, and watch how it will progressively worse. It's not even a fair fight and never will be. They will be completely annihilated. Look, the reality is that the Houthis are not connected to a border of Israel. So the number one...
Yemen is a long way away.
It is. And so, when you have Hezbollah, we're talking about the fact that there are Israeli homes that are backed up right against the Lebanese border. There are kibbutzes and small Jewish towns and large Jewish towns like Sderot and others that are right along the Gaza border. So those are going to get major attention from Iran's proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. Well, the Houthis, I don't know if they sit down and have like a whole... you're going to be an H, you're going to be an H, and you're going to be an H.
They went to the book of Esther, Haman.
That's right, and Haman.
And Hitler.
And Hitler, you name it.
Yep.
And so the point, though, is that the Houthis are still being aggressive toward Israel. They are blocking up trade routes that are going on because Yemen sits in a major area for trade to go in and out. In fact, I think a study was done to find out what countries would be affected the most by the Houthis preventing trade from flowing past their country, and it actually affects mostly Middle Eastern countries and Eastern countries like China. But the reality coming over here to the United States. But the reality is that the Houthis continue to be a problem for Israel as they launch drones and they launch rockets over. They've done some damage. But this is not President Trump is not sitting on his hands about this.
Listen what he says, Chris. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being shot fired from weapons of leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible. So that's major. And by the way,
they've been attacking Americans. That's the thing. The Yemenis have been attacking, or the Houthis.
This is an Israeli news service. This we got from the Israeli news service.
Yeah,
I just thought that was interesting.
Israel National News. Steve, the other day, that you and I, we took, we've mentioned this on the podcast. We took some pastors and ministry leaders to Israel. And the other day I was on our little text group that we have on WhatsApp, and somebody asked a great question. It was, Chris, there are Jewish protesters protesting at in New York City against Israel, or even more importantly, I should be more specific, against Mahmoud Khalil, the one that was kicked out of the country for instigating protests on Columbia University in Barnard. And so there's kind of been this contingency of Jewish people that seem to almost be promoting a Palestinian, pro-Palestinian aspects of whatever Mahmoud Khalil was pushing, anti-Israel rhetoric. Actress Deborah Winger, according to the New York Post, says she has debt to pay over Jewish upbringing while protesting Mahmoud Khalil. What's going on, Steve? I mean, I want to have this conversation with you really quick because I think it was a great question. Chris, why are Jewish people protesting, themselves, it seems like? Why would they do that? And there's a small contingency that do this to themselves.
There is, and it starts with GUILT, which we invented, by the way, too. Guilt.
Yeah.
Guilt. She says, I was brought up with a lot of things that weren't true. Now, I don't know what she means by that, but we just said that the Jewish people, through the word of God, given by God to the Jewish people, invented Western culture, Western civilization. The United States, the three branches of government come right out of the Bible. There's a lot of people who resent that. They call it the colonial state. Mm-hmm. They don't like democracy. They don't like capitalism. And so there are a minority of Jewish people who, on the liberal side, would fall under anti-capitalism, anti-democracy. Then there's the religious aspect, Chris, and you've seen them in Israel, who are actually on the side of Palestinians because they don't recognize the state of Israel because it's been brought about secularly. Mm-hmm. And they believe only the Messiah can bring a Jewish state. So they don't even recognize Israel and will do everything they can to fight it, even if they live in Israel.
That's right.
And Deborah Winger is not part of the religious aspect. She's part of the left.
The secular, yes,
Yep.
Secular left. Winger called Khalil, who was arrested by U.S. immigration officials and faced deportation for his role in anti-Israel protests that rocked Colombia last year, a political prisoner, and accused Trump of running a fascist regime. It's interesting because he comes from Syria, and the reality is that the Palestinian Authority functions more like a fascist regime than America functions like a fascist regime.
And it doesn't matter. You're going to put this in the show notes,
this
right?
This is on the show notes,
Well,
yeah.
Wait till they see the picture of Deborah Winger. What a punim. I'm telling you, she's angry. She is angry.
What's interesting is that you talked about the guilt.
Guilt.
Did you go with me years and years ago to that Sabeel conference in Philadelphia?
No, Lorna Simcox,
yeah,
who was writing for our magazine. She was the editor-in-chief of the magazine. She went with you.
Okay, so
I've been mistaken for Lorna Simcox.
Now, see, well, we went there, and it was a Palestinian liberation theology. So it was run by the PCUSA, and it was kind of an anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, but from a Christian perspective. Sabeel is a Christian anti-Israel, but pro-Palestinian outreach. And so we were there, but they had a couple Jewish people show up and do the same thing. And this is years ago, Steve, talking about how America is an imperial force, needs to be...
And you wrote about it in the Israel My Glory.
That's right. And how it all it's interesting how it all kind of ties together. There was this Palestinian liberation theology that was teaching that you need to undo the way the Bible talks for Palestinian Christians because it's too Zionist. Okay, so that's one. And then on the other hand, you have Jewish people that were there that are progressive left that were saying the real problem in the world is they're trying to undo Western civilization. America's an imperial force that needs to be, what is it called? Humbled, if you will. So anyway, that was very interesting. But I see there's a small contingency of Jewish people.
Yes, there is. Yep.
All right, Steve, last one here. I actually interacted with this guy. A friend of mine took me to a Anti-Defamation League fundraiser, and he's kind of a social media presence. His name is Zhakevich. He's kind of a comedian. Him and I talked for a moment about being two short guys, him being Jewish and I'm Christian. And he was talking about the fact a pro-Israel influencer, Zhakevich, once again found himself in enemy territory when he went undercover as an anti-Semite near Barnard College in New York City. While Fox did not go on campus, he had the opportunity to talk to several students in the area, and he told Fox News Digital that what he saw was shocking, Steve. Maybe you can share what he saw.
Well, what he found, first of all, a lot of people had no idea what they were protesting. That's first of all. They didn't know. He said one of the more shocking points of the video, Bernard's student who said she studies human rights and economics, was the nuance in terrorism. Nuance in terrorism. Chris, just put those words together. Terrorism, but there's nuance. In other words, they're trying to find a way to justify...
Well, they're redefining terrorism.
Terrorism.
Yeah.
I think, she said, terrorism is one of those words where people haven't actually thought about the meaning, the student says. Later in the video, she also agrees that when asked whether there is a nuance to rape, if it is used as a weapon of resistance, such as the number of rapes committed during the attacks on October 7th, when speaking, the student said that she was stunned when she... was that the next page?
See, the same thing
Right.
I can't come... Wait, maybe I can come to your rescue.
Come to my rescue. Where
are we at here?
I'm on page 3.
Yep, here's page 4. You got it?
You
read it. All right, here we go.
it.
Hey, we got to work on this.
Ay,
when
Vazmir.
speaking about this student, Fox says that he was stunned when she called herself a queer for Palestine, but could not seem to explain why she supported a movement that actively persecutes gay people. Fox says these anti-Israel students don't actually want to free Palestine from Hamas. He told Fox News Digital that he found Hamas supporters while interviewing people near the Ivy League campus. In the video that was posted, one unidentified female said that there are students who are more sympathetic to Hamas. In addition to the anti-Israel students, Fox spoke with some of the Jewish students while undercover. One of the students who is featured in the video said he felt unsafe at Columbia.
Hey, I don't just look at the picture on a college campus. It'll be in the show notes. They have a keffiyeh. They wear sunglasses and they cover the front of their face. Boy, sound like an old guy. Back in my day, in the 70s, when there were protests on the campus where I was attending, Kent State University, 4 students were shot and killed during that time. Anybody who protested, they were out there. People could see who they were. That's just the way it was. Now, there's a whole science in protest. It's not just protesting. It's being able to do things that are illegal and not get identified.
It says the pro-Israel influencer Fox told Fox News Digital that the diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI initiatives must be ended because he believes they are intellectually poisoning students, Steve. So anyway, all that in the show notes for you so that you can go to them and read them yourself. Hey, don't forget to text us at 424-444-1948. Steve, Yiddish word of the day time.
Well,
Yiddish word of the day.
Chris, we've been talking about halakha, which is the law. That's the Hebrew word for Torah law, which has to do with the Torah, has to do with the Talmud.
It comes from the Hebrew word to walk.
To walk.
To walk. It's the way you walk, your behavior with the Lord.
All right. Well, in Yiddish, the law, and in the context sometimes even of halakha, is Ge-Zets. Ge-Zets. The law.
The law.
But there's a whole court system here. Let me go over some of these. Das Gericht is the court. The judge is der Richter. The judge is Mishpatin. The lawyer is der Advocate. The verdict is der Psak. If you're guilty, it's schuldig. And if you're not guilty, it's umschuldig. So the whole system in Yiddish, but for our purposes, Das Ge-Zets is the law.
Well, I'm thankful that now, if I ever get taken to Yiddish court, I know who I'm talking to. Thank you so much.
I want to see der Advocate.
That's right. If I ever get pulled over in Brooklyn and I end up in court, now I know who to...
Give me the der Advocate. I need a lawyer.
I need an advocate right now.
That's right.
Hey, everybody, thanks so much for being a part of the Jew and Gentile podcast. Hey, don't forget to go to foiequip.org to sign up for Dr. Joe Zhakevich's class, the many names of God. He's going to be wrapping up his class. You want to register for that now by going to foiequip.org. Hey, and don't forget, you know what? You can actually come and be a part of the work that's happening here at Friends of Israel by joining us on one of our encounter trips. We've been talking today all about the Jewish law, especially boiling the kid in the mother's milk. Well, where did that come from? How's it worked out? Hey, we want to show you in modern Jewish homes today, Orthodox homes. Come with us on Encounter. You'll have a great time. Hey, you know what? Thanks so much for being with us. Get your stickers, get your pins, 424-444-1948. We'll see you next week.